I grew up on Barnum Street in Ishpeming, which is a short street. It's only about 4 blocks long. And in the next block from me was John Volker's house, the house that was filmed in the movie as his law office. And also on that same street is the Mather Inn, where the stars stayed when they were here. And also in the Carnegie Library, which is also on the same street, they filmed the law library scenes in Anatomy of a Murder. And my whole life I grew up a fan of the book and the movie, and I loved it. And I thought it was a great thing to be able to have a chance to sort of retell the story. The trial opened on September 15th, 1952, and an interesting coincidence that day was that there was a movie showing at the Nordic Theater which was called Carbine Williams, and it starred James Stewart. And it was had the tagline, "Hero or Killer, MGM gives you the answer in this new real-life story." So it sort of paralleled the events that were going on, and it was kind of ironic that James Stewart was also starring in Carbine Williams. It's even further ironic that the week the verdict was issued, there was another James Stewart movie playing in the Nordic Theater, and that was The Greatest Show on Earth. And in that movie, Jimmy Stewart plays a clown hiding from the law under that makeup. A lot of people are curious about the actual aftermath of the trial, whether it was as portrayed in the movie Anatomy of a Murder, where Lieutenant Peterson and his wife would have left town without paying John Volker his salary. And the Petersons did leave town without paying Volker, but not immediately. Lieutenant Peterson went to dinner at the Volker's house, and Donna Snyder was there and overheard him say something.
I heard him say that he knew what he was doing. But then, with irresistible impulse, I guess you do know what you're doing. And you might know that it's wrong, but you do it anyway.
After the Petersons left town, they were soon divorced, and Lieutenant Peterson, back in the Army, was traced to the Niagara Falls, New York area, where Volker was trying to collect $1,800 of his $2,000 legal fee. And Peterson at one point claimed that there was no agreement to pay Volker anything for his defense. And Volker then said that he was kind of like what attorneys always counsel people not to be, which is a fool and not get things in writing. Volker offered, actually Peterson offered at the time to put in writing that he owed Volker the money, and Volker said, no, that's okay. And he didn't take it. But the Army was not very helpful in having Volker retrieve his money, and eventually Peterson gave Volker the Luger that he used in the killing, and also a dress sword that he had from the Army as partial payment for the salary. One of the things that a lot of people are interested in, and I was interested in myself when I was researching this story, is what actually ever did happen to Lieutenant Peterson after he was acquitted. And there were rumors that he had died in a plane crash in Alaska, and this, of course, would have been after Volker tried to collect the fee from him. And what I found out in my research was that Lieutenant Peterson had actually remarried and then divorced, and then he died in a Texas hospital in 1977 from heart failure from chronic heart and lung disease. Mike Chenoweth, who of course was killed in the murder, his cremated ashes were spread over the beautiful Isle Royale National Park out in the middle of Lake Superior. And Mrs. Peterson, her name was Charlotte Carey, she reverted to her maiden name, she actually sued to try to stop the production of the movie when it was going to be made in early 1959, and that was settled for $30,000. Later on, after the movie was made, in 1960, the widow and daughter of Mike Chenoweth sued Dell Publishing and Columbia Pictures for libel and invasion of privacy in a $9 million suit, but they lost that suit and also a subsequent appeal 2 years later. Anatomy of a Murder was a book that was just a blockbusting success when it first came out, and the critics did offer mixed reviews to that. One review that I read that I thought was funny was the reviewer said the language reminded him of that of a cigarette commercial, and another reviewer said, I really, really like this strange novel, but for the life of me, I can't say why. And those were some examples of what the reviews were on the book, although it was widely praised for its courtroom realism, and also people liked the homespun nature of Volker's way of telling the story. Anatomy of a Murder also broke new ground in the sense that Truman Capote is often referred to as the originator of the true crime novel with his classic book, In Cold Blood, but which of course analyzed a real-life murder. But Volker's Anatomy of a Murder came out 10 months before the murders of Herbert Clutter and his family that were examined by Capote actually even occurred. So Volker really technically should be the originator of the true crime novel. John Volker in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is a legendary character to this day. And consequently, as it is often with legends, there are myths surrounding that legend. And two of those are involving Anatomy of a Murder. One is that he wrote the entire book at a small cabin up at Silver Lake, north of Ishpeming, and that isn't true. He wrote on legal pads in his office at home whenever he had the time to do so, but it was completed there, according to the archives at the John Volker papers. And the other one is that Volker never revised when he wrote. He just wrote and everything just came out properly. And you can even see in Anatomy 59 the actual copies of his manuscript that were handwritten, and you can see there's things crossed out and written in the margins and all over the place. But there are still people today who think John Volker never revised a word he wrote in all those 11 books. Preminger was a big master of trying to put together everything he could to promote his films, and across the country there were all kinds of advertising schemes and things set up that they would put across. And he was also big on publicizing as much of the filming as he possibly could. So when the stars arrived in Ishpeming, he had filmed those sequences, and those sequences, along with some of the first scenes shot in the courtroom, were featured on the Ed Sullivan Show a week after the stars arrived here. The courtroom in the movie is the actual courtroom, the Marquette County Courthouse. It's the big circuit courtroom that is still used today, that is shown in the movie Anatomy of a Murder. And to prepare that courtroom for the filming, they repainted it, even though it had just recently been repainted. And they also used, more than any other movie, they used dulling wax in there to take out the glare of anything, any like light fixtures or anything that showed a glare at all. They put dulling wax on it, and supposedly at the time anyway, more dulling wax was used on Anatomy of a Murder than any other movie. They also went to stabilize the floor at a cost of about $4,000, and that was to keep the heavy equipment from going through the floor of the actual courthouse. To build the same set in Hollywood would have cost $100,000. On the other side, if you go to the Marquette County Courthouse today, you can still see the chips out of the marble stairs from when they hauled the heavy equipment down there. When Anatomy of a Murder came out, it was considered shocking by a lot of people, not the least of which was the father of James Stewart, who was a conservative man who lived in Indiana, Pennsylvania. And he was shocked by the movie that he told his friends not to watch it, even though his son was in it. And apparently later he went to see it and, thought that it wasn't as bad as he had initially been told. There were fans in the movie who talked to Jimmy Stewart, who remembered him from It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. They said, Mr. Stewart, I don't know if I'm going to watch any more of your films. We've had all these great homespun movies, and then all of a sudden you're in the courtroom holding up a woman's panties and such. And Mr. Stewart's response was, well, if another role like this came along in the future, he would have to end up taking that role because they don't come along every day. Being a big fan of Anatomy of a Murder, I was obviously keen to any coincidences that might occur when I was filming it, and there were a couple of things that happened. I went to interview Catherine Grant in Minneapolis, where she was doing her cabaret show at the Heights Theater. And of course, Anatomy of a Murder was distributed by Columbia Pictures, and it happened to be that where the Heights Theater is in Columbia Heights, Minnesota, which I thought was kind of ironic. On the same trip, I went to a bookstore and saw that Foster Hirsch's book on Otto Preminger had come out, and picked it up and said, wow, this is the guy that I've got to get for my film to talk about Anatomy of a Murder. Later on, when I was in New York City interviewing Ben Gazzara asked that we meet and conduct the interview at the Carlisle Hotel. And we ended up going there, and he was interviewed in Cafe Carlisle, which a lot of people know is where Bobby Short, made that place famous. And also, Preminger, his independent film company was Carlisle Productions. So the Carlisle Hotel, Carlisle Productions, Columbia Heights, Minnesota, and Columbia Pictures. And finding Foster Hirsch's book along the way, it was all kind of nice for a big Anatomy of a Murder fan. Anatomy of a Murder in Marquette County, of course, was filmed in Marquette, Ishpeming, Michigami, and Big Bay. And a lot of people, are pretty clear why they filmed in Marquette, because that's where the Marquette County Courthouse is, and in Ishpeming because that's where Volker's hometown was. And Iron City, which is actually in Anatomy of a Murder, is kind of a composite of Marquette and Ishpeming put together. And then, of course, Big Bay is where the actual crime occurred. But why Michigami? The folks at the Michigami Historical Museum hadn't even known the answer to that and been asked that quite a bit. But in my interview with Donna Snyder, I was able to find out that when Boris Levin and Henry Weinberger came to Michigan to scout locations, she was taking them around, and they went to Big Bay, didn't see a main street, city street scene that they would want to have, a small town scene. And they wondered where else could they take them that they might like, and they ended up going to Michigami, and Boris Levin took a walk around the small village there and came back and said that he really loved the place. He said, this place has real character. He said, I just saw a woman look at me through her curtain having it pulled back. So that was how Michigami ended up being put into the film, and until just recently, they weren't aware of that fact. Anatomy 59 was a project that took me about 2 years to complete, and I really had a great time working on this film. I had the initial interest from my younger days on Barnum Street, of course, and having the book and the movie my whole life. But the more I got into this story and looking into the true facts behind the original case, and the more I met people that were associated with either the book, the movie, or the original case, the more compelling this whole process became to develop this documentary film. And whether it was meeting local people here that were so gracious and, of course, wanted to, keep the life of Anatomy of a Murder living here in the Upper Peninsula, where it continues to this day, to the original cast members from Hollywood and New York that were very gracious and helpful to me, and people behind the scenes that worked very hard to help get this project together with me. This has just been a great project, and I think for people who haven't seen the movie or read the book, this may prompt them to do so. I hope it does. And for those who love the movie and love the book like I do, I hope that this makes you take it down off the shelf one more time, or go and put it in your DVD player and watch it again.